Picture this. It's late summer, somewhere in ancient northern Europe, around 40,000 years ago, and a woman is walking her usual foraging route along a riverbend she's worked dozens of times before. She knows this stretch well, knows which roots grow deep near the third curve, knows where the berry clusters tend to hang heaviest in this particular season. What she doesn't expect is the large male wolf standing about 30 feet ahead of her on the path, watching her with an expression that's doing something genuinely strange. It's not the expression wolves make when they're deciding whether to attack. It's not the expression they make when they're simply passing through. It's something else entirely, a specific, directed, almost deliberate attention that feels meaningfully different from any wolf encounter she's had before, and she stops completely still, trying to figure out exactly what she's looking at. Then something clicks. 3 months ago, deeper in the forest, she and 2 other women came across a wolf tangled in a natural rope of fallen vine, exhausted and panicked, leg twisted badly. After a very tense, very silent, very slow 45 minutes that nobody in the group particularly enjoyed, they got it free and backed away without anyone getting bitten, which at the time felt like the entire transaction. The wolf disappeared. Nobody thought much about it afterward, except as a story that got told around the fire that evening with the dramatic embellishments that 3 months of perspective inevitably add to a story about almost getting bitten by a wolf. And yet here is this wolf, same pale patch behind the left ear, same slightly unusual gait on that front leg, standing on her foraging path, watching her with something that doesn't feel like threat, watching her in a way that after a long, quiet moment resolves itself when the wolf simply turns, walks slowly into the undergrowth, and is gone. She stands there for a while afterward, genuinely unsure what to make of any of that, and then does the most ancient human thing possible in response to a confusing experience. She goes home and tells everyone about it at dinner. Let's start by establishing something critically important that shapes how we need to think about animal memory generally, because there's a widespread, persistent misconception about animal memory that needs addressing before anything else makes sense. Most people operate with an implicit assumption, rarely examined directly, that animal memory is something like a simplified, shorter duration version of human memory, basically the same thing but with less capacity and shorter retention. That assumption is significantly wrong in ways that matter enormously for this conversation. Animal memory isn't simply a diminished version of human memory. It's a different kind of memory system, calibrated by evolution toward different priorities, often extremely powerful in certain specific domains while being less developed in others. Many animal species demonstrate memory capabilities in certain specific contexts that genuinely rival or exceed typical human performance in those same domains. And one of the domains where this shows up most consistently is social memory, the remembering of specific individuals and what those individuals have previously done. Let's talk about elephants first, because they represent one of the most thoroughly documented, most frequently cited cases of exceptional social memory in the animal kingdom. And the evidence here is genuinely striking. Research on elephant social memory has produced documented cases of individual elephants recognizing and responding differentially to specific other elephants they haven't encountered in periods of over a decade, demonstrating that whatever cognitive system elephants use for social individual recognition maintains reliable, detailed records across timescales that most people would find surprising for a non-human animal. More directly relevant to our central question, research has documented elephants showing differentiated behavioral responses toward specific humans based on prior interaction history, treating individuals associated with past positive or neutral contact measurably differently from individuals associated with past threat or harm, even when those individuals aren't displaying any immediately obvious behavioral difference during the current encounter. One of the most frequently cited specific examples involves wild elephants in certain regions of Africa showing consistent, measurable behavioral wariness specifically toward members of a particular local human cultural group known to historically hunt elephants, while showing considerably less wariness toward members of a different local cultural group with a non-hunting relationship with elephants, even when both groups of humans are dressed identically and behaving identically during controlled research encounters. This pattern, documented by researchers working specifically on human-elephant interaction, suggests elephants are maintaining and acting on group-level cultural memory about which specific human populations have historically represented threat versus non-threat, across timescales and across individual lifetimes that extend well beyond any single elephant's personal experience with those specific groups, suggesting some kind of socially transmitted memory operating across elephant generations as well as within individual lifetimes. If elephants maintain this kind of multi-generational, socially transmitted memory about human groups across decades and generations, the implication for ancient human interactions with elephant populations is genuinely fascinating and worth sitting with directly. Ancient human groups living alongside elephant populations for thousands of years, some groups hunting elephants and some groups not, would have been gradually, accumulatively producing exactly the kind of differentiated behavioral response from those elephant populations that modern research has documented, essentially writing themselves into the social memory of elephant populations across timescales that exceed any single individual human or elephant lifetime, through nothing more than the accumulated weight of consistent behavioral patterns across countless specific individual interactions. Now let's talk about crows and ravens specifically, because these birds represent perhaps the single most striking documented case of long-term individual human recognition and memory in the animal kingdom outside of our relationship with domesticated species. And the research here is simultaneously fascinating and slightly unnerving. Researchers at the University of Washington specifically studied crow memory for individual human faces by having researchers wear specific latex masks while capturing, banding, and releasing crows, then returning to those same areas wearing either the same mask or a different mask in subsequent visits. The results were dramatic and sustained. Crows that had been captured by researchers wearing a specific dangerous mask showed consistent, targeted mobbing behavior specifically toward humans wearing that same mask for periods extending years after the original capture event, while ignoring humans wearing neutral control masks, even as the total crow population changed and individual birds that hadn't personally experienced the original capture began showing the same targeted wariness, demonstrating that this information was being actively transmitted socially from birds with direct experience to birds without it. The inverse experiment is less formally documented but no less interesting. Various anecdotal but compelling accounts exist of crows and ravens in areas where specific individual humans regularly provided food or other positive interactions, developing what appears to be targeted positive recognition of those specific individuals, approaching them preferentially, showing reduced wariness around them specifically, and in some documented cases, bringing objects that researchers have interpreted as possibly representing something like reciprocal gift-giving behavior toward humans associated with consistent positive provision. Whether that last interpretation is fully accurate or represents some degree of anthropomorphic projection remains debated. But the underlying behavioral differentiation toward specific individual humans based on prior positive interaction history is considerably harder to dismiss. Let's connect all of this directly back to ancient humans and the specific cognitive relationship they were developing with the animal world across the deep ancient era, because this is where the story gets genuinely interesting and considerably less well known than it deserves to be. We established in our previous video that ancient humans were accumulating extraordinarily detailed, multi-generational knowledge about specific animal species through their evening fire storytelling and knowledge-sharing culture. Knowledge that went considerably beyond what any single individual could develop through direct personal experience alone. Now let's think about what that means from the animal side of this equation, specifically regarding long-term social memory in the animal species that possessed it. If ancient human groups were consistently, repeatedly interacting with specific animal populations across many human generations, and if those animal interactions included both threatening encounters and genuinely helpful ones, and if the animals in question possessed the kind of long-term social memory we've been discussing, then across those many generations of interaction, those animal populations were almost certainly building and transmitting their own accumulated memory of those specific human groups, differentiating human groups with consistent helping behavior from human groups with consistent threat behavior, and potentially extending the positive behavioral memory of specific helpful interaction patterns across animal generations well beyond any single animal's personal lifetime experience. This means the developing relationship between ancient humans and various local animal species wasn't simply a matter of human learning accumulating on one side of an otherwise static relationship. Both sides were accumulating and transmitting experiential knowledge about the other, across generations simultaneously, creating a genuinely bidirectional, multi-generational cognitive relationship that neither side was consciously designing, but both sides were actively building through the simple accumulation of consistent, repeated interactions over time. Let's talk about the specific ancient human evening culture angle here, because this connects to something genuinely important and underappreciated about how animal memory intersected with ancient human social life. We've discussed across multiple videos in this series how central evening fire gatherings were to ancient human culture. The storytelling, the knowledge transmission, the music, the social bonding, the occasional fermented substance that made already warm social evenings feel even warmer and more connected. What we haven't discussed specifically is the role those evening gatherings almost certainly played in tracking and transmitting information about specific individual animals in the local environment. Not just species-level behavioral knowledge, but genuine individual animal recognition and relationship history information. Ancient humans living in a specific territory for extended periods would have regularly encountered the same individual animals, large animals particularly, bears, wolves, elephants, certain large cats, with sufficient frequency to develop genuine familiarity with specific individuals recognizable through distinctive markings, behaviors, injury histories, or territorial patterns. An elder around the fire telling a younger group member about a specific wolf with a pale ear patch and an unusual gait wasn't just sharing animal behavior information in the abstract. They were transmitting specific individual relationship history. This specific animal has been encountered before. This specific animal was helped before. This specific animal has shown no aggression in subsequent encounters. This specific animal is worth treating differently than an unfamiliar wolf, precisely because individual relationship history with this specific animal is already established. This kind of specific individual animal tracking, maintained and transmitted through evening storytelling culture, essentially gave ancient human groups a collective relationship memory extending across individual human lifetimes, maintained through the same social transmission mechanism that made ancient human knowledge accumulation so extraordinarily powerful in every other domain we've discussed throughout this series. Now let's address something genuinely important regarding what this means for the ancient wolf from our opening scenario, because the encounter we described makes considerably more sense once you understand both sides of this cognitive equation. That wolf wasn't engaging in some random, inexplicable behavior when it stood watching that woman on her foraging path. If wolves possess the kind of individual recognition and social memory research suggests they do, and if the prior positive interaction of being freed from the vine, Tangle had produced a positive individual recognition memory for those specific humans, then that wolf's behavior on the foraging path almost certainly reflected exactly the kind of differentiated individual recognition response we'd expect from an animal cognitively capable of maintaining specific positive individual human memory across a 3-month gap. Not gratitude in any human emotional sense necessarily, but something functionally equivalent in behavioral terms, a specific recognition that this specific individual belonged in a different behavioral category than an unfamiliar human, a category associated with non-threat rather than threat, and behavioral adjustment accordingly. Let's bring in something genuinely fascinating here regarding the specific cognitive mechanisms underlying this kind of long-term individual memory in social animals, because understanding the mechanism helps explain why this capability appears so consistently across such diverse species. Social animals, particularly those living in complex, long-term social structures with stable membership, face a genuinely demanding cognitive challenge that drives the development of robust individual recognition and relationship tracking memory. Managing the ongoing social relationships within their group across time requires consistently accurate memory of who has been reliable, who has been threatening, who owes social debts, who is owed them, and how prior interactions inform expected future behavior from each specific individual. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated social memory system we've been discussing throughout this video, and because it evolved specifically to manage within-species social complexity, It turns out to be easily extensible to tracking specific individuals from other species, including humans, who become regular features of a social animal's experiential environment through consistent, repeated interaction. Let's address something worth being honest about here, because intellectual integrity throughout this series matters, and this topic is one where it's easy to slide from what the evidence actually demonstrates into more emotionally satisfying stories that go a bit beyond what science can currently confirm with confidence. The evidence that social animals with good individual recognition capability remember specific positive human interactions and differentiate those individuals from others accordingly is genuinely solid and well documented across multiple species in controlled research contexts. The interpretation of specific behaviors, particularly things like apparent gift-giving in crows or the wolf encounter in our opening scenario, as representing conscious, emotionally experienced memory and gratitude in the way those words mean for humans, is considerably more speculative and involves real, ongoing debate among researchers about exactly how much we can reasonably attribute to animal cognition versus behavioral pattern that looks similar to emotional memory from the outside, but may involve different underlying processes. Keeping that distinction clear doesn't make the documented evidence any less remarkable. It just makes the interpretation appropriately honest. Now let's talk about something genuinely fascinating regarding dogs specifically, because this represents the most extensively studied, most dramatically documented case of long-term individual-human relationship memory in any animal species. And it connects directly to the ancient human relationship with proto-dogs we've discussed in multiple earlier videos. Research on canine memory for individual humans has produced evidence of dogs recognizing specific individuals after periods of absence extending years, showing behavioral responses to the return of a familiar human that are clearly differentiated from their responses to unfamiliar humans even after extended separation, and maintaining what appears to be some kind of ongoing internal representation of their relationship with specific humans that influences current behavior even in the absence of recent direct interaction. This capability, in domestic dogs, almost certainly represents the extreme developed end of a recognition and relationship tracking capability that existed in ancestral wolf populations in less developed form, amplified dramatically through tens of thousands of years of coevolution with ancient humans that selected specifically for exactly this kind of sensitive, fine-grained, long-lasting individual human recognition and relationship memory. What does this tell us about the specific experience of ancient humans whose groups maintained proto-dog relationships? It tells us that the proto-dogs living alongside or near those ancient human groups were very likely maintaining detailed, long-lasting individual memory of specific humans within those groups, differentiating between individuals with consistent positive interaction histories and individuals with less positive histories, potentially maintaining those relationship memories across individual lifetimes, and contributing to the transmission of general human group relationship information to younger group members through social learning. Ancient humans living alongside proto-dog groups that maintained this kind of individual relationship memory were, in effect, being remembered and tracked cognitively by those animals in ways that made the developing mutual relationship considerably richer and more cognitively substantive than simple proximity or resource exchange would alone explain. Let's bring this back around to the ancient evening storytelling culture one more time, because there's a specific, beautiful connection worth making explicitly. We've established that ancient humans were telling animal stories around their fires in the evenings, sharing individual animal encounter histories, building collective knowledge about specific animals in their territory through social transmission of first-hand experience. We've now established that various animal species with good individual recognition capability were simultaneously maintaining their own individual memory of specific humans they'd encountered, including those who had been helpful. What this means is that the cognitive relationship between ancient humans and the local animal world wasn't simply humans learning about animals while animals remained passive and undifferentiated in their responses. Both sides were maintaining individualized, specific, socially transmitted memory about the other across multiple generations. Simultaneously, each side's accumulated memory of the other shaping the behavioral landscape that new members of each species encountered when they began their own experiences with the other. A young ancient woman going on her first solo foraging trip in a territory her group had inhabited for generations wasn't entering a behaviorally neutral animal world that would respond to her based purely on immediate behavioral signals. She was entering a territory whose resident animal populations carried, in their socially transmitted behavioral memory, the accumulated legacy of every interaction her human group had previously had with those specific populations, positive and negative alike. And when she told her story around the fire that evening, she was adding her own experience to the accumulated legacy that future members of her group would carry into their own first solo foraging experiences years from now. The memory wasn't flowing in just one direction. It was flowing through both species simultaneously, building a shared experiential history that neither side could fully articulate, but both sides were actively maintaining and living within. Let's also address something genuinely interesting here regarding what might have happened around the fire, specifically on evenings when particularly striking animal memory encounters had occurred, because these stories would have occupied a specific, significant place in ancient evening social culture. The woman who came home with the wolf with the pale ear story wasn't just sharing casual gossip. She was sharing information that had direct, immediate, practical value for every other member of her group, specifically the information that this particular wolf in this particular territory had a documented prior positive interaction with members of their group and had subsequently behaved in a way consistent with individual recognition and non-aggression. That information changed how every group member would interpret and respond to future encounters with that specific animal, creating exactly the kind of individual animal reputation tracking system that, maintained across generations through consistent evening storytelling practice, would gradually build an extraordinarily detailed collective understanding of the individual animals sharing their territory, their behavioral histories, their individual temperaments, and their apparent relationship status with the human group. Add some fermented honey to that evening, add the loosened social inhibitions and heightened interpersonal warmth that we've discussed across multiple videos as characteristic of ancient evening social gatherings at their best, and you have a social context maximally conducive to exactly the kind of vivid, emotionally engaged, deeply remembered storytelling that would make this individual animal information stick in memory and transmit reliably to every group member present, including the youngest ones who were still building their own foundational understanding of the animal world they'd be navigating for the rest of their lives. So, do animals actually remember humans who helped them? Based on the well-documented long-term individual recognition and relationship tracking capabilities in elephants, corvids, canids, and various other cognitively sophisticated social animals, the specific evidence of socially transmitted positive and negative human relationship memory in species like elephants and crows demonstrating these patterns across individual lifetimes and into social transmission to non-directly experiencing group members, the evolutionary logic of social memory systems being naturally extensible to tracking individuals from other species encountered with sufficient frequency and behavioral consistency, and the specific, beautiful bidirectionality of the ancient human and animal memory relationship maintained through both ancient human evening storytelling culture and animal social memory transmission simultaneously. The honest, evidence-informed answer is a genuinely qualified, but genuinely meaningful yes. Not all animals. Not in all circumstances. Not necessarily in the emotionally rich, consciously experienced way the question implies when most people ask it. But many animals, particularly those with sufficient social complexity to have evolved robust individual recognition and relationship tracking memory systems, appear genuinely capable of maintaining lasting, differentiated memories of specific humans associated with positive past interaction, transmitting those memories socially to group members without direct experience, and allowing those memories to meaningfully shape their behavioral responses to those specific individuals across timescales that, in some documented cases, extend years beyond the original interaction. And maybe that's genuinely the most interesting, most quietly moving takeaway buried in all of this. Ancient humans carrying individual animal memory stories from their grandparents' experiences, and animal populations carrying socially transmitted relationship memory of those same ancient human groups across equivalent generational spans, were building a shared, multi-generational experiential history together across the species boundary, neither side fully aware of the other's cognitive contribution to what was accumulating between them, both sides simply living within a territorial relationship that memory, social transmission, and consistent behavior were gradually, quietly, and apparently persistently making more complex and more genuinely mutual with every generation that passed through it. That wolf standing on the foraging path with its pale ear patch and its slightly unusual gait, wasn't just an interesting story to tell around the fire. It was, in its own unintentional way, proof that the memory of a single act of care, offered 3 months earlier in a forest clearing with more anxiety than confidence and considerably more almost biting than anyone was comfortable admitting afterward, had persisted, had been retained, had, in whatever way a wolf's cognitive system retains and acts on specific individual relationship history, been remembered. Which means that somewhere in the deep, ancient world, before any civilization, before any formal category for what that interaction even was, an act of help was given, and an act of help was, in the only language available to either party at the time, remembered.